And yeah, we're gonna, sometimes I like to laugh a little bit because if I don't laugh, we'll cry. And I think we're gonna talk about some things today that could make us cry, and that's okay. Crying is a part of our healing process, actually. I do it a lot. I talk about it a lot. But also, we can laugh. We can also have joy in our lives. And so the people who are joining me on stage to talk about, the title is just, Our Children Are in Trouble. That's what we're talking about. And so with me on stage is Christine Moutier, who's with the American Society for Suicide Prevention, and Hannah and Charlie Lucas, who have created an app that they're going to tell us about. They're from Atlanta. Look at that. They're just like, Atlanta! Yes! So I actually want to start, we started the first panel this morning with a similar question, but mental health is not something that we're kind of walking around saying, hey, can I tell you about my therapy appointment? Yeah. Can I talk to you about the fact that my kid had this problem today, or that my student wasn't able to hand in work because they had a panic attack, or the fact that I have a family member who's battling depression or bipolar? No, so we don't talk about this. And so I want to ask you each kind of what brought you to the issue of mental health and young people, and what was the part that made you decide, I'm not just going to do this work, I'm going to be public about doing this work. So we'll actually do it like this. We'll do Hannah, Christine, and then Lucas. So, Hannah?
Hi, guys. Well, the whole reason that I got started in mental health is because that when I was a freshman in high school, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness called POTS. It stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And basically, it just caused me to faint. So I was fainting frequently. I missed over 200 classes my freshman year of high school, guys, which is awful, if you can imagine. I was bullied, I was harassed, and I was even sexually threatened by guys in my classes who found out that I passed out. It was awful. I lived in a constant state of fear and terror. This caused me to spiral deeper and deeper into depression. I struggled with eating disorders. I self-harmed, and eventually I did have a suicide attempt. But luckily my mom saved me that night. So thank you, Mommy.
Thanks, Mom. She's right here. Can you raise your hand, please? We're applauding and smiling, but actually that's a really important part, because you had this capacity, even though these things were happening to you, Hannah, you had a pretty deep communication with your mom, right?
Yeah. No, actually.
No.
At that time, we always just communicated about my physical well-being, because it took 2.5 years for me to get a diagnosis when I started showing symptoms. 2.5 years bouncing from ologist to ologist, doctor to doctor, getting random diagnoses every time you go to a different specialist, We were just so focused on getting me physically better that we didn't talk about my mental health, And come to think about it, that's why I struggled with my eating disorders. That's why I struggled with self-harming, because I just had I was struggling with so much, and I didn't know what else to do, really. But now we do talk about it, so.
We're so thankful that you're here, Hannah, and that you're able to talk about what you got through and that you made it through. So we're happy about that. Thank you. Thank you. Christine, for you, what was the thing that kind of made the connection where you were just like, it's not just a job, it's kind of a mission?
I think for me, when I was in medical school, I was struggling myself quite a bit, took a leave of absence, thought that I couldn't do medicine because of my own sense of myself, my identity, my own mental health crisis. And took some time off, got therapy for the first time, came back. By the time I started training in psychiatry, I had become very attuned to the cultural signals in the environment that were not making it okay to talk about human struggles, let alone mental health struggles. And then what happened next at UCSD, from my vantage point, fast forward a little bit later, I became a dean for student affairs and medical education in the School of Medicine. And around this period of time, there were 13 losses to suicide of faculty physician of all different types of specialties. And
At UCSD.
yes. Mhm. And so I had sort of become known as a medical educator and a leader in the medical school who was very passionate about students' and trainees' own mental health as it related to their own well-being, but also as it related to their ability to be good doctors and be with their patients and empathize and care and heal. And so anyway, because of those suicide deaths that were occurring around that time, I and a group of us were put in charge of figuring it out and get to the bottom of this. And so that started a journey of really trying to figure out what can a school of medicine, a hospital, but translate that into a high school, a church, a workplace. Is there something we can do to allow the culture to support people of all different types of experiences that we have as human beings, so that we can get upstream from that kind of crisis and actually feel connected, get treatment if it's necessary? It's a whole lot of different things. But so I started a suicide prevention program for the physicians and trainees at UCSD, and later on then got to know the organization that I work for now, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So I actually feel oddly, I guess, sort of lucky in a way that I get to devote all of my time on something that I care about the most, which is the well-being of anyone who struggles and who may be at risk for suicide, and also people who have lost loved ones to suicide, which is a part of that spectrum.
So Lucas, how do you? What's your story? How do you come to this?
Hi, I'm Charlie.
Did I just Carly?
Yeah.
It says Charlie right there on my paper. So it's the altitude. So Charlie, talk to us about how you get to this issue.
Well, I sort of got involved with mental health in general after Hannah's suicide attempt, because everything was sort of about Hannah at that time. And
Siblings, if you couldn't tell.
sadly, wish I wasn't. But after Hannah's suicide attempt, and after we actually started acknowledging mental health in our house, because we didn't talk about it before. It wasn't really a thing before. It was just something that was there and we didn't really talk about. It was just really stigmatized. It was like Voldemort and Harry Potter. He must not be named. But after Hannah's suicide attempt, we actually started learning more and more about mental health, how Hannah was struggling with depression and anxiety, and that she could actually get help for that. And it wasn't just something that we pushed into a closet and then just told her to ignore. I found out that I had panic attacks after that. They're fun. And then, yeah, I'm talking about mental health because it's one of those things that people are afraid to talk about, and I want to help bring it out of the shadows and actually somewhere where we could actually deal with it and actually help people who are dealing with it. So, yeah.
So Charlie and Hannah really are some of the most patriotic Americans right now. Maybe you don't know this statistic. I don't know if you know this statistic, but the McSilver Institute, based at New York University, has done research particularly on the issue of mental health and communities of color. Right now, the group that is experiencing, do you have the data? Do you know this? The group that is experiencing one of the most intensive rises of suicide
Latin American.
are Black children between the ages of 5 to 12.
Yeah.
So let that just sink in, right? Black children are taking their lives at rates at which we have not seen before. So the fact that Charlie and Hannah are speaking out this way is actually, like I said, like work of great American patriots. So I don't take this lightly because it's really important that you guys are able to say so what you're experiencing. So as a mom of a daughter, you're welcome. As a mom of a daughter who battled and battles anxiety, can you just kind of, just because, oh my God, it's hard. Like when I think about the house, the battles, the conversations, the discussions, the pleitos, you know, the accusations, oh my God, it just feels really terrible. But Hannah, if you wouldn't mind, can you just kind of tell us what it felt like? This notion of just kind of on a daily basis, you know, and you're because you didn't understand that you were battling depression exactly, right? So can you just tell us what you were feeling, what you were actually feeling?
I wasn't feeling anything, and that's the part that scared me. Like my dog did something cute and I didn't smile. Like that's terrifying because my dog is adorable, you know? I mean, it terrified me, you know? I just remember going day through day through day, hoping to feel something. I think that's actually why I started self-harming, because I wanted to feel something. I couldn't feel anything.
Can you take us, so I'm going to ask you, Hannah, to do this for us, because a lot of people maybe have never experienced self-harm, maybe have never met anyone who's experienced this, and it may feel like, wait, what? So help us to understand the process of what's happening in this part of your brain that's saying, okay, and now I'm going to, whatever it was that you did. Help us to understand that so that we can better understand how we can see it.
You're just going in with the questions, aren't you?
I'm a journalist, you knew that. But I did make you feel loved and comfortable when we had our conversation.
Yes, ma'am. I would just try going to bed after not making it through a full day of school. After passing out through fourth period, like always, having to be wheeled in my little wheelchair, because I had my own personal wheelchair in the nurse's office, along with my own code blue. A teenager shouldn't have their own code blue at school, guys. That's just embarrassing. So I would get home, I would go to my room, I'd sneak my technology upstairs to watch Netflix, and then I would try going to bed, but I couldn't. I was like, I don't feel tired. I don't feel awake. I just feel here. Like I don't feel anything. I'm just here, you know? I struggled with why I was here, and I'm like, I'm this sick kid. I'm a problem for my mom, because my mom, she's a writer, so after dropping me off at school every single day, she would go to the Starbucks right across from my school because she knew I would pass out. She gave up her livelihood for me because I was sick. When my brother got home from school, the first thing he would ask is, "Where's Hannah? Did she make it through a full day of school?" And the answer was often no. And I was tired of hurting people, and I was tired of not feeling, like I couldn't empathize with them. I just felt guilt. And I did it as a punishment, almost. Like I'm hurting everyone, but I don't feel anything. You need to feel something. You need to be punished, essentially. And yeah.
Thank you. Christine.
Well, I was just thinking, thank you for sharing that, Hannah. We are so hard on ourselves, and when we're suffering, we have an extra layer of judgment and stigma that it goes beyond even, you know, the way you would think about anyone else who's suffering, and probably even the way certainly your loved ones are viewing your own situation. So anyway, it just made me think of that, how the issues of mental health experiences are so multi-layered, you know. I think part of this story that is so hopeful and remarkable is that a family can come together and treat mental health like any other health crisis that is going on. If it were a physical health crisis, which you also had going on, you're going to specialists, you're finding a path forward, you're getting treatment. And that is what can be done for mental health as well.
I mean, there's so much judgment, right? I remember when we saw the therapist, her therapist said, you have an illness, it doesn't mean you are the illness. If you have anxiety, it's like a cough is coming on and you got to deal with it. It doesn't mean that you're less of a person or you're, not worthy, but we as a society have all of this judgment because we're supposed to be so perfect. And by the way, I'm super public about my therapy. Thank God I haven't battled severe issues, but super public, precisely because the more we're able to talk about it, and of course you can see me crying now, and we actually did a Latino USA special on crying. The question was, do Latinos cry more, Latinos and Latinas? Because of course there is the soap opera crying that's Mexican crying, But what it turned, when we did this kind of research about, and actually crying there's science about this. We spoke to a scientist. It's actually very healing. But when we cry, we feel so judged.
Yeah.
Right? But actually, you can cry now because you're healing the pain past, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not 100%.
One of the big
but
things
yes.
that I notice now that I didn't notice then is that I never let myself cry. Not in front of, not even in front of a mirror. I wouldn't let myself cry, I wouldn't let my mom see my tears, my brother, my father, my dog, anyone, until that night I broke. And I let everything out. That was the first night that I cried in 9 months, ever since I started showing the actual physical fainting symptoms. I never cried because I didn't want to seem weak.
So, Charlie, tell me a little bit about how you've kind of processed this. And I mean, I'm thinking about now my son is super attentive with my daughter. He's older, she's younger. He's 22, 23. She's 21. And so now, there's a lot of camaraderie there. But it was a little rough there. I remember, and I don't even remember if he could voice it, but a little bit like, my sister takes up all the space, right?
So mean. I had an illness.
That's not a good excuse now.
Oh my God, I love you guys. I love the fact that we can be laughing at this point. So, dude, tell me about that. Tell me about how you managed that, because you're kind of freaking out and saying, yo, what about me? What about Charlie, who happens to be a black young man in the United States of America?
Well, during that time, I sort of became the second and forgotten child. I was pushed aside. I did all the chores. I did all of Hannah's stuff. I took care of her. I literally carried her up the stairs and down the stairs. And I still haven't gotten paid for it. I'm waiting, Hannah. But I literally did everything that I could to actually help her get better that I could. I would do all of that all over again if it meant that she would be okay. But, who are we clapping for? But
It's like, I want to get paid still.
But honestly, I would do all of that all over again if it meant that Hannah would be okay. But seriously, during that entire time, being pushed to the side, it didn't really bother me. I just wanted to know how Hannah was I didn't care that it was all Hannah. I literally didn't care as long as she was okay and as long as nothing major happened. And I'm coping with that, like with what happened now with the app and actually making the app and helping people through the app, because we made this app just to help Hannah, and because it's helping other people, it's great. But I just made this selfishly for Hannah.
Okay, hold on a second. Here's another data point. Latina adolescents have the highest rate of attempted suicide in the United States.
Yeah.
They've had that for probably now 4, if not 5 decades. I think that's probably going to get worse considering what we're living through right now and the fact that we have children who are dying at the hands of this government. But that's when I met Charlie and Hannah, I was like, God, I wish I had had this app for my own daughter, for my students, right? So the app is kind of fabulous. It's called Not Okay. And later, when you guys, when we're done off the stage, you guys can talk with Charlie and Hannah, and they can show you a little bit about what it looks like. But basically, what it does is, I'm going to let them tell you what it does, because that's what I should do. What does it do?
So, the Not Okay app is a digital panic button that when pressed, it sends a text message to your pre-selected up to 5 closest contacts with a text message that says, "Hey, I'm not okay. Come call me, text me, or come check up on me," along with your current GPS location and directions.
So it's kind of like, it's like one-stop shop. It's like, I'm just not feeling good. Boom. Come find me.
Yeah.
Call me. Look
Yep.
for me.
That's exactly it.
I love this app. Can I get it?
Oh,
Can
it's
anyone get
available
it?
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only available in the United States, but we are expanding to the UK, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Mexico.
Many countries by the end of
Yes.
this year, guys.
And we're also expanding to Spanish and French because
And
mental
other
illness is not
translations,
just
yeah.
limited to one language. So, yeah.
Christine, are you like freaking out as much as I am? I mean, this is like this is the thing that gives us hope.
Yeah,
right?
I love it. It's fantastic, and I honestly feel like you speaking out and people like yourselves, you are the change that is happening. And as you grow up, the layer of this culture that we're talking about that makes it okay to alert your loved ones that, hey, I'm putting you on my list, and you might get this kind of message, right? Because it's probably not going to be out of the blue. You're going to be talking about the issues. So that is what we need to be doing about mental health.
How do we deal with the judgmental issues? Recently, I was talking with a therapist who was dealing with a kind of crisis situation, and the therapist was just saying, the child is in an emotional mental health crisis. It would be the same as the child has a broken leg. You've got to take them to the hospital to kind of get them checked in, but it doesn't mean that they're a failure or that they're... How do we deal with the judgmentalness of our society? And I know that I'm asking you like the $64 million question, but... And by the way, we're going to open it up to your questions in about a few seconds. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think what's happening right now across our nation is that there are attitudes opening up, that mental health is real. It's valid. Yeah. We get it. In fact, what we found in a survey we did at AFSP through a Harris poll is that 90% of Americans say, my mental health is as or more important than my physical health. So where's the disconnect then with the reality that we're living in? Well, that to me, because I've really tried to reconcile, why is the suicide rate going up if these are the attitudes that Americans are saying that we believe in? Believing something is important and having a literacy and actionable ways to understand moment by moment what's happening in your life and your loved ones' lives, they're quite different things in terms of attitude and knowledge. And I think that is where the gap is. I'll just add one more data point into the mixture. 1 in 4 Americans will develop a mental health condition, lifetime. So these are common, just like physical health conditions. 50% of those individuals it will have manifested by age 14, 75% by age 24. And oftentimes, it is not so in your face. It can be the child or teenager that is having stomach aches, that is coming home from school, that is struggling, and you can't figure out why they've sort of fallen off their personality curve, their developmental trajectory, not hitting the same kind of milestones. There is a very good likelihood that that is a burgeoning anxiety disorder or mental health condition. And so we can get so much better about paying attention to that. So I would dial it back a notch and say mental health will manifest in ways that are very subtle oftentimes. And we just have to learn how to differentiate that those are things to be paid attention to.
I actually think that there is a crisis-level epidemic of anxiety among teenage girls in the United States of America. Flat out, I really do believe that there is an epidemic. I think that a lot of this, especially for girls of color, there's a whole added element, and for girls in general, of imposter syndrome, right? I mean, one of my favorite things that someone said about the 25 candidates who are running for president, 25? Who are running for president is like, if you've ever dealt with imposter syndrome, just look at all the men running for president, because they obviously feel like, and I'm just like, okay. But among our teenage girls, am I right or am I wrong?
There has been an increase.
And, we know from Hannah that this was really clicked off by something that was happening that was physical, that, kind of this. But what do you see, Christine, in terms of, Hannah, did you want to say something? Actually?
Well, personally, we found out later on that I've had anxiety my whole life. We never knew it. It manifested in, like, my back was always hurting. I always had these really bad stomach aches. I got major migraines that were more than just my POTS symptoms. I was a competitive gymnast, and if any of you guys know anything about gymnastics, the whole point is literally to strive for perfection. And growing up with that, as a sport, literally striving for perfection as a sport for 9 years of my life, is definitely had a big impact on my anxiety, I think I could say. And my whole thing was I always have to strive for perfection, I mean, especially being a woman of color in America, there are certain stereotypes you have to deal with. My mom, it was just a thing growing up, because I don't live in it's diversifying. But when we first moved to Forsyth County, it wasn't very diverse. And if any of you know the history of Forsyth County, you understand why. But the whole thing growing up was you have to be 10 times better in order to be seen as half as good. And I'm like, whoa.
So being a woman, where we know that this is already, and then being a woman of color, it's real. And then we're not even talking about structural racism. We're not even talking about structural racism and how that has an impact. But Christine, are you feeling the same thing in terms of girls?
I think there are some expectations, wherever that's coming from. The parental generation of expectations, who we are, what we grew up with, and what we now expect of our children. This idea that, we became so achievement and perfection oriented, and at the expense of being human, and also letting children be children and really play and experience, the idea that you will face struggles and you will fail many times in life. That's what we should be telling our children, and that it's okay. It's what we do with those moments. So we have some major sort of fallacies that do not jive up. Actually, when you take a look and analyze them, they don't sync up in terms of a whole integrated set of a value system. But again, I think if we can emphasize a culture around authenticity and vulnerability, that's a starting place. And it really does start with people telling their stories and showing that there is struggle, but there is a way to overcome and move through. It's not that it's simple or easy, It may involve multiple strategies of family, of yourself, meditation, exercise, all the things that you may do. Developing your app was the way you were coping, helping others, and also treatment. And that's what we need to be sort of talking about and demonstrating that as more of the reality. It's a positive.
So those of you who follow me on my Instagram know that one of the things that I do is I box. I started boxing actually in the last presidential election. And I don't ever want to hit anyone. I hit a bag. But I have so come to love, and I've never even watched, like the last boxing match I saw was Ali versus Frazier, 1970 something. That really helped. And then meditation. I started meditating, and that changed everything. And these are things that I never thought I would do. So I think, just kind of opening up our own selves to, like, what other possibilities do we have for self-help? Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. That's also really cool because that karate and MMA is sort of what I also do to cope with everything. I've been doing it since I was like seven, right? I don't know. Time is slipping by.
Just correct. You're 14. What belt are you?
I got my black belt last year, and now I'm trying to learn.
Nice.
And now I'm trying to learn Krav Maga and Muay Thai. So yeah, I also do that to cope. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So there are ways that we can all find that make us feel better. So questions. We have, okay, you're going to come and take the mics. Here's what I like to do with the questions. I actually like to get, go, get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, and then we'll talk a little bit, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So can we do that?
Don't
Just
know if
right
I'm
up
going to be able to remember that all.
I'm going to take notes. That's what I'm here. That's my job. Go ahead.
I'm curious how you find, or if you find an issue when you were talking about 6 to
5 to 12, yeah.
God. How social media affects that, and what can be, if it does have an effect there, what can be done about that?
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question? Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on her point and say when you gave those statistics, they were specific to men and women of color. And why is that statistic bigger, larger among men and women of color than the totality of our youth? Okay. And the second part of that would be directed to you with respect. When you say that suicide prevention among the faculty, what is suicide prevention? What is it?
Okay. Another question. We have another couple of questions. Yeah.
So I have a question for Hannah. When you were back in those moments where you were, considering hurting yourself, if this app existed, would you have used it? And what would you have? Would there have been words that would have helped you to use it had it come your way? I mean, how would you present it to a child?
Okay. Thank you.
My question is for Dr. Christine. You talked about the burgeoning symptoms. And when talking to Hannah, she described she had physical symptoms, obvious to see, obvious to notice. How do you address those symptoms that you see breaking through with a 14-year-old boy without alarming him unduly?
Okay. And then one last final question right there in the corner, and then we'll...
I'd like to hear more from Hannah on what she did to overcome her issues so we can hear a little bit more about her story.
Okay, great. You guys got that? Or do you want me to... I mean, social media, kids of color, I wrote down actually white men and suicide prevention. What exactly is it? Hannah, what had happened if the app existed, symptoms and not alarming people, and what you've done to kind of overcome. So, jump in.
I'll take the social media one. So, wait, what was the question again? It's like social media.
Yeah, like how has social media, does it help, hurt, what?
Yeah. Towards younger kids. One thing that I really want to get across is that social media itself is completely neutral. It's not sentient. It doesn't like social media isn't the thing that leaves hate comments on the bottom of YouTube videos. That's us. That's people. So social media is just allowing people to just say things without consequences. And just being able to say whatever they want instead of having to just be, so they could be someone else online and then someone else in person. And they're just saying all the things that they think, but they don't want to like get called out on because they're probably wrong. So I do think that social media does sometimes magnify the perfectionism and stuff like that, because it does show a perfect life. Like on Instagram, whenever you're scrolling through and you see all these people in like perfect bathing suits and stuff, looking perfect, even when I'm watching food videos and everything's like perfect. How do they flip that croissant? Anyway. But it does magnify the perfectionism aspect of that. And it does also give you unattainable standards, and it does let people be who they're afraid to be in real life because they don't want to be called out for doing wrong things. It does magnify things, and it does make them worse, and it can also make them better because it does have a lot of positive aspects, but social media itself is a completely neutral thing. So.
I feel like on my Instagram, I feel so reinvigorated on the question of mental health, especially because I just get so much positivity. I mean, I know that you can, if you're not in a good space, you can see just the good and you're just like, my life is nothing. But I love, and I follow on purpose, real super affirming, particularly for women of color. And I just kind of love that. But Hannah, did you want to, well, you got a lot of questions.
I'll
Hannah.
answer like 4 questions at once.
Yes.
So back to the social media question, because personally, I just think it's an interesting question. We've been asked this a lot, because we are in the digital field. But personally, I think social media is a good thing because I make it a good thing. The algorithm is set based on which posts you like. So if you're always liking negative posts, then that's all you're gonna see. And that's all I saw for a long time because I wasn't in a good headspace. Because I was a gymnast, I love working out, and I followed all of these exercise people, but it got to the point where, the Instabody was trending, and it still is, but because of that, that's all I saw, and I'm like, I don't look like this. And it's like, why don't I look like this? And then you have to kind of come back to yourself, and it's like, these people don't look like this either. You could see the watermark from Facetune right under there. Facetune is like a photo shopping app, so you could see the watermark right on their post. And it's like, these people don't look like this either, and they're trying so hard. So that's to answer your question.
So people wanted to know Hannah, what would you have done if the app existed when you were having your really challenging moment? And what did you do? A little bit more about your story, about how you worked to overcome.
It was a fight to overcome my old mentality. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that I don't deal with depression and anxiety, because I do. It's still an uphill battle at times. But the big fight that I had to go through was changing my thought pattern. Being through everything that I've been through, all of the terrifying false diagnoses from a lupus scare to a cancer scare to all of these different diagnoses scares. All I saw and all I heard was negativity for such a long time, that after my suicide attempt, I had to take a serious look inside of myself. I worked extensively with my therapist and my life coach, so that they could tell me that, hey, you can do better, so that they can encourage me and also tell me where I'm falling short and where I can do better, And if I had the app back then, I think I would have used it. I mean, actually, I know for sure that without a doubt I would have used it, because there was still some part of me that didn't want to struggle. I felt so dull and I felt so numb inside, but there was this little voice in the back of my head saying, you need to get help, you need to get help, you need to get help. But the stigma, like, I was terrified of coming out and talking to my mom, my family about this, because of the stigma. I didn't want them to look at me any differently than they had. I was already a sick kid who dealt with all of the sympathy from everyone she came across, So I just tried to hide as much as I could to look as strong as I possibly could, Yeah.
We're so happy you did all that hard work, Hannah. Christine, did you want to pick up on any of these questions? Oh.
Okay, so just real quick, back to the social media question. You all said it all in terms of what the science is showing. It's a very emerging, complicated field of study it's on hyperdrive right now, right? There are tons of studies looking at what is the impact on users' mental health, and even some fewer that look at suicide risk specifically. And it's just highly complex because of the platforms changing, the utilization patterns change, and because, just like we heard, depending on the mental state and past history of the person who is the user in that moment, their interactions are shaped by their mental health, and their perceptions of the feedback can be shaped by what's going on up here as well. So it is very complicated, but what I will say, my own opinion, is that the long and short is that it can be used for enormous good, but there is a layer that is pervasive that does augment anxiety, fear of missing out, the comparison game, that perfectionism. So I would say it's a word of significant caution. When I did that deep dive in the literature and I gave a lecture on it, I actually went home and I initiated some new practices at home. My kids weren't thrilled, but we started charging our cell phones in the kitchen at night instead of having them on our nightstand, as one example.
My mom's in the...
She's like, okay, we're going to do that.
And that is both because of those impacts, but also because of the nighttime impact in particular on sleep and just the light exposure and disrupting sleep.
So can you just answer that very specific question, suicide prevention, what is it?
Yes, great. I love that, because that is exactly what I was struggling with in that moment, is there a prevention strategy for a population of people who happen to be these physicians in my hospital, my colleagues? And what I will say is it was a long journey of looking at the science again and saying, what is evidence-based for reducing suicide risk for people? And has that been well studied? And it needs more science, but the same approach that we applied to that group of UCSD physicians and trainees is being applied right now at NYPD, at the Boston Police Department, in some workplaces around the country, in some higher ed. So there is an approach that involves 4 or 5 different levels of strategy. Universal education, finding a way, though, to make sure that people who are in that highest level of distress moment have a way that they can seek help that doesn't jeopardize themselves, their fear of what will happen if I out myself as struggling in this way. And imagine, for a physician, fear of losing your medical license. For law enforcement, fear of losing your entire career, access to your gun. So there are some significant ramifications potentially, but the truth is, if we treat our mental health proactively, more upstream, we will prevent so much suffering for ourselves, but also occupationally in terms of potential impairment. So there are a number of strategies that go into a robust suicide prevention program at the community level. And I would call the hospital-based program I was doing was not a clinical program. We were treating each other as people, members of a community. There are also clinical treatments that reduce suicide risk, and making sure that everyone has access to healthcare, including mental health care, and then specifically there are some suicide risk reducing treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and there's a short list that I'm happy to talk more about.
There's also Reiki and acupuncture, which I totally love and adore. Do we have some questions over here? We've got a microphone. Yes, go ahead.
So thank you all for your leadership and your honesty. So in your story, I heard that your family was the answer. But at the end of the day, it's systems and all the other people in your community and neighborhood that really are meant to catch you when you fall. So I'm wondering, in your work, and this is for everyone, what changed in your school or in your neighborhood that has resulted in positive, open conversations about mental health? And if not, how can you advise us to push for systemic changes within all the other systems that you interact for real long-term changes in our social fabric?
Okay. It's like the $64 million question there, but thank you. Yes, other questions on this side of the room? Anybody? Oh, okay.
There's a question over there.
Okay, raise your hand because we can't see you. Yes, go ahead.
So a friend of mine last year lost his life, and one of the things that he wrote was that he was afraid of appearing weak and sharing, what was really happening with him. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is sort of how that issue has come up, the sort of fear of appearing weak. And so my question is really hard, but how can we be authentic without appearing weak, being perceived as weak?
It's an important conversation. There's a question in the back right there.
Thank you so much for telling your story, Hannah. My stepdaughter is going through something similar, and I have a question about insurance coverage for therapy. We have such a hard time finding DBT therapy, even just any kind of therapy, not just group therapy, but just coverage for this is next to impossible. And if you don't have, and there are tons of people that are taking out-of-network clients, but that is unattainable when somebody needs therapy, either inpatient or therapy 3 to 4 times a week. You're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'd love any sort of ideas or thoughts about that.
Thank you. And then here in the blue shirt right there.
I'd also like to kind of bring in the discussion on adverse childhood experiences and that impact that has on many different aspects, including the inclusion of generational poverty, generational trauma, and how that has impacts as well. Because I think that will also talk about some of like the minority health pieces that we were talking about.
Thank you. All right. Do you want me to repeat them or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the question about the family involvement and how that helped and what changed in terms of the positive, what changed that led you to be able to have positive conversations about mental health.
So
whole conversation around weakness, and then a conversation around insurance coverage, which, oh my God, yes. And then finally, adverse childhood experiences that lead to generational toxic stress and trauma.
So I'll start off with the first question. To be honest, when I went back to school, nobody cared. Like, nothing changed. Everyone was like, oh, you're at school. You made it through the whole day. Go you. And I'm like, notice anything different? And they're like, haircut? And I'm like, no. But the only thing that changed was me. I had a complete mindset change. I was the thing that changed in my community. In my school, we always talked. And my school is a very competitive school. I remember when I had a 4.0, as a GPA, and like I want to say early my freshman year of high school, we went to the counselor to see what rank I was, and I was like rank 100 something, and I had a 4.0 GPA. So my school is a very competitive school. You are your class ranking. You are your GPA at my school. So I had to break out of that. I'm like, no, I'm a person. I am Hannah Lucas. Here's what I stand for. Nobody's gonna ask what my GPA in high school was when I'm graduated and when I'm owning my own company. You know, nobody's going to ask that.
True. That's right.
So I had to change. And for your question about weakness, and I'm so sorry about your loss. Seriously, thank you for being here. In spite of that, though, that takes some serious courage. You know, because I was a gymnast, my idol growing up was Carrie Strug. I aspired to be like her so much. If you don't know her story, she was in the Olympics. She was chosen to do vault for her team. The first time she did it, she shattered her ankle. So she got up. She had to get like a 9.6 something as her score. And 10 is like the highest score you could get in gymnastics. So she had to get at least a 9.6 something in order to win gold for her team. So she got up. She just shook it off despite the shattered ankle, and she crushed the vault the second time. And she got the score that she needed, and she won it for her team. I aspired to be like her so much when I was a gymnast because she was so mentally tough. You know, a saying in our house was mind over matter, that no matter what's going on with you physically, you can overcome it with your mind, which obviously doesn't work all the time, guys. Yeah. So I had to really break out of that mindset. You know, I still have to check myself sometimes because I still have to like purposefully open myself up to people because I have to realize that being vulnerable takes more bravery than seeming strong, you know?
It's when we feel hopeful about the future.
Yeah. What was the third question?
There were adverse childhood experiences.
No. I wanted to just tag on to that because I think you're so on to something. If you really think about what's going on when you're struggling with mental health stuff, you are forging through, you're applying a lot of energy to appear like you have it all together. You are giving yourself self-talk. You're having to counter very, distorted negative beliefs and thoughts about yourself and the world around you. There's a tremendous amount of courage and strength going into that process, but because our culture hasn't embraced that conversation, it's all internal. And so it's like invisible. We don't even recognize that it's happening, and it still gets boxed under the weak label. And I think there is a way to break out of that by looking at reality, and I think the media has a role to play with this. We need role models in entertainment, and we need stories in news media that show this, that show that reality, that strength is in the human struggle that everybody goes through, and talking about that more. So I think it can be redefined, actually, about the weakness thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think what you're saying kind of relates to the point about making healthcare include mental health care, because let's face it, as you said, the media portrays what we want it to portray. Like, if you watch junk all day long, that's what's getting the really high viewing rates, So that's what they're gonna start making more and more and more and more and more of. So we all have to come together and put our foot down and say, no, I don't want to watch this anymore. I want something new. I want something hopeful. I want something that has a plot to it. And
what's your favorite TV show right now?
Oh, you guys are gonna judge me for this. It's Riverdale.
Do you feel like there's a TV show that you've watched that has handled mental health in an interesting way?
One day at a time.
Jinx.
Oh my
Triple
God! You
jinx.
just totally
Blackout.
named my favorite TV show ever in history.
I was gonna go protest when they
So
canceled
that's
it.
the it's the new version of One Day at a Time that has been
Yeah.
released on Netflix. Norman
Yeah,
Lear.
it's incredible.
It's an amazing family. It happens to be a Latino family in
Yeah.
LA. It's Rita Moreno is on it. If you haven't watched, and they were just not renewed. So we're all very upset about that.
Yeah.
But they do take
We're gonna
on
go
this.
protest for that, guys. That's what I was talking about earlier with the media, right?
That show was like exactly my family.
Yeah.
My
And
grandma's
for the
exactly her.
healthcare question, I feel like, okay, so you guys are all above 18. You guys have the power to vote. We live in a democracy, which is power to the people, right? So if people want something, then we have to put our minds together to get it. So you guys can lobby. You guys have power. You guys can go lobby your senators, your congressmen and women to say, hey, we want a law that requires mental health to be covered in all healthcare plans.
Oh,
you
that
know?
would be amazing. Amazing. We've got just 2 minutes left, so Charlie, give us a 1 minute wrap up, and then Christine, you'll take us out.
Can I take the weakness question? Can I
Yes.
take the weakness question? Yeah. Okay. So as a black guy in today's society, ever since I was really little, I was always told to not let them in, not let them see, like from Frozen, Elsa. Yeah, great. To literally never let my feelings show unless I was happy, and basically that's the only emotion that I was able to show. And as a black guy in today's culture, it's really stifling to never be able to ask for help, never be able to read instructions, and you're never able to ask for help. You're never able to say, "Hey, I'm really struggling right now," or go out and talk to your friends and just be like, "I really just need a hug right now." That's not allowed. You're not allowed to talk like that. So yeah.
Back to the advocacy point that you're making, Hannah. That is so huge, and there are several initiatives on the table right now. The Kennedy Forum and our organization, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, have just partnered together to make mental health parity a real thing, along with several other changes that need to happen in the advocacy space. And so if you're not sure how to get involved, but you want to get involved, one thing you could do is go on afsp.org and just check out the advocacy page. And you can click on, I want to become a field advocate, and we make it super easy for you. Even I can do it in my crazy busy life. You just click on it, and it populates for your policymakers and those items that are on the agenda. So it makes it easy. What I would want to leave you with is a way that brings it down home and just very real. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about families and individuals being able to talk about our mental health in some new ways. And I think for all of us, this is a changing world. How do we actually live our lives like mental health is the legitimate, critically important and valid health issue that it is? I think it can start with all of these things we've been talking about, or just as simple as, I would challenge you, the next time you're in a conversation with a loved one or someone you are wondering if they are struggling, it may have been the most minor thing that tipped you off, that made your gut just feel a little funny, like they don't seem themselves. That is a very good chance in that moment that you've picked up on something, because we are so good at cloaking it and putting on the face. So I would just challenge you to practice an active listening conversation where you say to the person, are you okay? And where you are inviting an honest, deeper conversation. And if they indicate that they are not okay, then you be quiet and listen. And you ask for more. Tell me more about that. When you use those words, I want to understand what you mean. And you have to be willing to sit with it and control your instinct to fix it, because that's what we want to do in that moment. But this is not a quick fix kind of situation, and that is okay, and you are supporting them by listening to them actively like that. That is a form of love.
You know what? That is actually